Welcome, friends, to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast. Today, I'm joined by two friends, Brandy Whitaker and Janna Lynas. Both of them have had instrumental roles in my oldest daughter's life, soon to be in my youngest daughter's life as well, most likely. They both run a preschool program that my daughter has participated in. She participated in it for 3 consecutive years. And it really changed the way my husband and I thought about education and the way that it changed our theories and beliefs about nature and being out in nature more. So I wanted to have them on because, as you guys know, I've done a solo round on the topic of vitamin N, on the topic of really getting ourselves outdoors. But I also know that a lot of listeners to this podcast are young moms, like moms who are maybe struggling with their energy and they're looking for advice with their hormones, but they also have small children that are sometimes tapping into that energy. And so how can we really not only, put ourselves first and really kind of get outdoors ourselves and do things for our own health, but how can we also implement those things into our children as well? So it's the perfect day to do this interview because it's like 72 degrees as we're recording, and it's a November day in Indiana, which is unheard of. My husband and I took our youngest daughter today out into the woods for a hike. I was telling Chris as we were walking, I'm like, we're preparing her for outdoor preschool, which is exactly what these two have cultivated. And so I want to just kick us off with just asking them to share a little bit about themselves, what led them to doing what they're doing. And then also if you guys could kind of tell my audience, like, what is the preschool about that you guys are part of? So I'll kick it off with Brandy. If you want to start, we'll go there.
Okay, my name is Brandy Whitaker. I am a lover of nature and a mother, an educator, and really an advocate for children and for childhood. And what I've discovered in my own process of really getting to the meat and potatoes of what learning is that we're getting a lot of things wrong in this country when it comes to how we're educating children and the environments that we're selecting for those educational experiences. So I call this process unlearning. And what that's looked like for me is just getting back to my own intuition and my own needs and dreams and hopes for myself and my family and also the world. And I think that starts in our earliest learning experiences. And I think that the best space for those experiences are outdoors.
Yeah, and just a little backstory. I think I should preface this so that my listeners know. When we first enrolled Ellery in the program, I was just looking for, at the beginning, she was, I think, 2.5 years old, and I was looking for just something for she and I to do, and stumbled upon the preschool that Brandy had sort of kicked off. I guess this was, 4 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't even know what it was, but I was like, sign us up. Like, this sounds great. Let's do this. And so it was my first drop-off experience with my oldest child. And through getting to know Brandy and just the program, it was exactly what we needed. It was like it was put into our laps because it was exactly what my husband and I needed and our family needed. And it really has, like I said before, it's shaped our perspective on what education should be. So I would drop my oldest daughter off every single day for 3 consecutive years. She took off running for these 2 teachers, so there was never any hesitation. And she spent her entire mornings in the woods. So literally outdoors, especially once COVID started, it really became 100% outdoors. Like, there was only a couple days a year you guys were inside. So this idea of like outdoor education and really letting the child's curiosity lead the way is something that I didn't realize, right? I was a public education child. I was somebody that kind of had been the line leader and followed the rules and kind of been in the box for so long. But here I was as an entrepreneur. And I was finding myself, thanks to Brandy and thanks to this program, I was finding myself saying things to my oldest daughter all the time, like, be careful, watch out. Like, right. Here I am, like, sort of keeping her from taking risks and kind of putting her into a box that society deems as a box. So this program really opened my eyes to really what it should be. It should be a process of unlearning. It should be a process of just kind of letting the child lead and letting them have the freedom of the outdoors instead of just a facility and being the line leader and following the box. So anyway, Janna, I want to get to you too. So I want you to share your story and what led you to what you're doing.
Sure. So anyone who knows Brandy and I very well know that we are very similar to each other in a lot of ways. Um, so as I was listening to her just introduce herself, a lot of the same descriptors come to my mind as well about myself, just as an educator, as a wife and a mother to 4 children. That's something that Brandy left out. She's a mother of 5. um, and very much just this strong heart for advocating on behalf of children, on behalf of families, really. And that's something that we've always said about our preschool is that it is for our students first, for the children, but it's also for their families. And so, and you just explained the impact that that had on your family as well. So I too came from the public ed world, have taught in a variety of schools, even around the world, and never felt like I fit very well in public ed, or necessarily even in a private school that is also very much following just the same systems. And so I really can say that I kind of accidentally fell into this in a way at Connor Prairie, but I'm so thankful that I did, because I know this is exactly what I should be doing. And yeah, spending 3 hours outside 5 days a week with children is definitely my jam. It's definitely what I advocate for all children. And yeah, I'm just thrilled to get to do it. So thanks for having me today.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I think we should start this off by just asking the question, what can children teach us?
Mm.
I'll let either of you answer, or both of you. Have at it, my friends.
Everything is the short answer. I was just sharing with someone today, we have our education team at Connor Prairie is growing rapidly, and we have a lot of new part-timers, many of whom were former teachers, that are coming into this very different space with very different expectations and experiences. And I think what they struggle with the most is feeling like they're not doing enough, which any mom can relate to that feeling, right? It sometimes feels like we've been taught that when children are around, it's our job to give them ideas, give them products to create or things to check off a list, things to complete. And I think that that's all born from our desire to want the best for our children and to want them to have every single thing, especially things that we didn't get to have when we were young. And so there's all this pressure to sort of perform for kids and to treat them differently than we treat adults. And a lot of the times I see the way adults treat children and think you would never want to be treated like that. And that brings us to intention versus impact. Most of the time, a parent's intentions are great, but the impact that they're having on their children is very different than what they might think. So we spend a lot of time just watching children. And I always tell people that that's one of the best ways you can serve them, because by watching them, you can learn so much about who they are and about what they need. Before 150 years ago, humans were just learning from being. And there was no public system that was demanding children of this age need to learn these things, and it needs to happen in this sequence. And so when you think about that in the span of humanity, it's really interesting that now we think we've figured it out, and this is what every single child needs to do here to be able to be considered a well-educated adult. But the truth is, their brains already know what to do. We've learned so much about the brain in the last 10 years, more than we've ever known. And their brains know exactly what they need. That's why children spin, and why they run, and why they jump, why they want to hang upside down, why they want to scream as loud as they can. Those are all things that their brain already knows that's what they need to be doing. And most of what we do is stop that process. That's really limiting to their experiences. And like you said, Jenny, no opportunity to take that risk. So we often say, never rob a child of an opportunity to discover something for themselves. I often hear phrases like, oh, that will overflow. don't pour that, that will overflow. Well, how do you think you know that that's going to overflow? Probably because at some point you had the time, space, and freedom to try it for yourself. And we don't need to tell them those things. We just need to give them a space where they can discover it.
Yeah, so good. I remember when Ellery was first in preschool, and so much of this was like new concept to us, right? Like it was like we had been ingrained with this idea that like, it's so funny because I'm thinking of this friend of mine right now who has a little toddler. She's really young, under the age of 1. And she just posted a video on social media the other day of the baby taking her first steps. I want to say she's like 10 months old or so. And so, but the funniest part was, she's standing behind the baby and the toddler baby, and she's got all arms around her. She's like the shield, and there's nothing around this child. Like it's a carpeted room, and she's guarding the baby. And I reached out to her because we're close friends, and I was just like, it's okay to let the baby fall. Like, and I've been this person, right? Like with my oldest, like I was that person. And we were just telling someone the other day about with our youngest, she's been more of like, she'll be okay. Like she's going to figure it out. Right. Like, oh, let her fall. Like, oh, she's, I'm not going to like let her tumble down the stairs. But of course, like if she's doing something, if she's climbing something, like she's figuring something out. So just an example of, again, like things that we've seen in our own lives, things that we were sort of stuck into. I also see it with generational differences too. Like I remember being at Ellery's preschool graduation, and she was, of course, it's basically her second home. And so she was running around in the mud barefoot with her friends at preschool. And I remember my mom being there with me and saying, are you just going to let her run all the way out in that field? Like, that's really far away from you. Like, and she doesn't have any shoes on. And I was like, worst case scenario is a bee, right? Like a bee is worst case scenario. She's going to get stung at some point. Right. So, but it's like, again, it's totally like where I started when I first dropped her off, like sort of this, like, I don't want to say just sort of overshadowing and wanting to sort of shield her from things, right? Like telling her the cup is going to pour over or overflow, or telling her she can't climb on that because she could fall. Like those types of things I think are so common. And it's funny because I've heard, I don't know the exact statistic, but I've heard that, adults by the time, or I think children by the time they're a certain age have heard no, I forget how many times. And so it's like, we are doing that to our children, right? We're putting them in this position where they don't want to take risks, where they don't want to push through. Right. I was just talking to Ellery about her desire to be in the school theater program. She doesn't want to wait until January. And so she's like really eager to do it. Right. And I'm thinking about like the fact that there's no hesitations, right? Like there's no hesitations. Like it's just something she wants to do. She's not afraid of what other people are going to think. She's not afraid of being able to do it. And so it's like, how else is she supposed to experience that than to try it herself? So I just wanted to interject there because I think that's something that we've seen transformationally. And I think it's something that you start to notice, like when you're out and about and you're with friends, you're thinking in your mind, like, it's okay. Like let the child fall. Right.
Yeah, we can't keep them from everything painful. I think that's what happens to us as parents. We want to shield them from any pain. And that just is part of being human. And sometimes that's physical pain and sometimes it's emotional pain, but it's also what makes our human experience so complicated and beautiful, and makes the times when you feel really great so much more valuable and important to you. We use the language safe as necessary, not safe as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what your story made me think of, your example, because of course we're not going to intentionally let our children be in environments where we know there could be great harm, but children need to skin their knees because they need to learn about themselves, that this hard thing can happen. My son's playing baseball now, and he's been so afraid of the ball during kid pitch because 8-year-old pitchers aren't super accurate. And he got hit with a line drive playing pitcher's helper the other day. And I was actually so glad that it happened because it hurt, but then so much of that fear went away. Yeah, it hurt, but you had on the gear that protected your organs and you're fine. And you might have a bruise, but that's all. And so when we allow them to feel a little bit of those things, they start to believe so much more about themselves and the power that they have and the resilience, because our bodies are really amazing and they should be given the chance to see that for themselves and to trust that.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think when you were talking about I forget how you said this, but it was, asking the questions and sort of sitting back and observing the child, I can remember being with you guys on a few different occasions, and even in seeing the photos that would come back from, days at preschool. I can remember hearing you guys, like if a child was, let's say they were building something, right? Instead of encouraging them to build a set thing or sort of leading them through their play, instead it was more observational. It was more of this sort of step back and watch and then ask questions, right? Like, what are you making? How will that work? Right? Like those types of things, which also has been really impactful. So I want to kind of touch on that briefly, this idea of a child's curiosity and how we can really facilitate that as parents.
Yeah, so something that we also say in our across our education team really is the child is the curriculum. So that's what really gives myself as a teacher and others as parents that freedom to sit back and not just sit back and take a break, but really sit back to watch and to observe and to notice. Because when you ask that original question, what can you learn from children? And Brandy said everything. That's the first word that came to my mind, because literally it's everything. It's 1,000 things and more in just the 3-hour time span that I get to spend with children each day. I could have never designed all of those things. It never would have been as meaningful. There would not be near as many connections being made as they're making to their own world, their own unique space in the world, because it's not the same for every child. So, yeah, just giving yourself, we talk about this a lot too, giving yourself permission. And Brandy touched on that too earlier, just a little bit with, we feel like we're not doing enough if we don't have this elaborate plan and all of these perfect things all ready to go and say, here, this is what we're doing today. And here's the step by step. And I need to show you how to do this. Instead of just sitting out a couple of bowls of, I don't know, macaroni and beans and a bowl of water and whatever it is, right? And see what they decide to do with it, or listen for them to tell you what they need and then go get it and watch the magic that unfolds. So it really is giving yourself permission to, no, I'm doing enough. I need to step back and watch to see what they're doing. They will teach you. They will teach you all day long if you're noticing.
Yeah. I think we get too caught up in the speed of our lives sometimes, like I think sometimes it's just a matter of getting from one place to the next, following a schedule, right? Like I know for us, I really cherish the weekends, because on the weekends, we usually have no set schedule. It's like, what do you guys want to do? What do you guys want to play with? And sort of just let them lead. It can really be some of the best days, because you're like, I like that we didn't have this structure. I love this idea of just sort of going with the flow and letting them sort of take the lead on those particular days. How can we be more, oh, go ahead. Chime in.
Sorry. I was
You're
thinking
fine.
another thing that came to my mind was just this also, I'm thinking back to my own younger parenting days, because my children are ages 23 down to 16 right now. So it's been a long time since I've had children that are, closer to the ages of my students at least. But I know at least during those days, those early days, I planned a lot of things. I was that parent. I was that teacher years ago. So I get all that. Done a lot of unlearning myself, but I planned a lot of things so that there wasn't a lot of mess. I didn't want to have a lot of cleanup. I wanted things to be pretty well controlled all the way through, so that by the time my children were done with something, it was basically already clean and there wasn't much to do. And so I had to really, honestly, when I first started teaching at the preschool, I had to really grapple with that a little bit, and embrace that and be okay with that, and understand that there are, again, hundreds of thousands of things that they are still learning through all of that experience, and myself. I'll step back. there's a lot for me to learn in that moment too about myself and what's important to me and why is that important to me? Why is it so important that things need to be clean and tidy all the time?
Mhm.
Right. So, I mean, there's questions to ask myself in that too, but yeah, I used to do that. I used to do that a
Yeah.
lot. And yeah, just giving yourself, again, like giving your children that freedom, but also yourself. And you know what? All that stuff, all that can be cleaned later, right?
Mhm.
It'll
Mhm.
all come together later, but just letting yourself embrace that is really important.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is based in fear. I mean, for me, it's like we're always concerned about, like, am I keeping up? Am I doing enough? And you want your house to look a certain way because someone might see it. And you want your house to look a certain way because it might make you feel, like you do have more control, and like you have done it a good job. And so those fears, like, are really limiting for our children. And so we have to look really closely at, where did those fears come from? Are they valid? Who are they serving? That's a question to ask. And I guess what I was thinking about, Janna, when you were talking was, our beliefs guide our actions. And so sometimes we have to get really in touch with those beliefs. Do we believe that a clean house is the sign of a happy house? Or taking it deeper, do we believe that children are trustworthy and capable? And once we grapple with those beliefs a little bit, and maybe even say them out loud, if you can name it, you can tame it. Once you say those things out loud, you can recognize that those are the things that are guiding your actions. And if you believe that you can trust children, and that they're capable, and that their brains are designed to make the best from their environment, and also to keep themselves alive. Humans have that innate sense, right? Then you let your kid run far away in a field without shoes. But you got to get those beliefs in check first, in order for your actions to align with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny because this morning when we were hiking with Sutton, she demanded to wear these like Minnie Mouse, basically like ballet slippers. And of course, the woods was muddy and treacherous. And as we're walking toward it, Chris looks at me and he's like, "Oh man, I forgot to grab her other shoes." And I was like, "It's okay, they hose off." And I was like, "Wow, have I changed?" Because
Who am I?
who am I even? Because I would have been the one that would be like, "Oh, not the shoes," who cares about the shoes?
I was so worried about my house when I was a young mom. And I remember a really pivotal moment for me was when my son was sick in the fall. He was a preemie, so he has issues with his lungs, especially when he gets a cold or whatever. And it was fall, and he really wanted to jump in leaves. And the next thing I knew, I was outside raking them into trash bags, and I dumped them all out in my living room so that he could play in the leaves. And that cleanup took probably 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
I just realized he would have missed all of that because I was worried about my floor being vacuumed. And I was still able to vacuum my floor.
Right. Yeah. So funny story, a couple of nights ago, I'm talking to my oldest and I say to her, so she's now in kindergarten. She's enrolled in a private school here, and they still have quite a bit of focus on outdoor education, as much as we could find locally. But I was having a conversation with her about her favorite classes and her least favorite classes, and what are the things you're enjoying and what are the things you're not enjoying. And I thought it was so funny because, and I wanted to tell you guys this offline anyway, because she said, well, I really love music, which I thought, of course, she's always been into music. And she was telling me she loves recess. What does every kid not say recess? I mean, of course. And but the funniest part was, I said, well, what are you not liking? Is there anything you don't like, or do you just love it all? And she said, I don't really like art. And I said, you don't? And she said, well, I really like my art teacher. She said, but I don't like art because I don't like to, basically what she was saying was, I don't like to do the project that we're doing in the class. And I thought to myself, all that came to my mind, you guys, was the paint on the garage door at preschool. And how I remember like the end of the school year one year, pulling up and like the whole garage door, it's a little house where the preschool exists. And the whole garage door that they had let the children paint with all different colors. I mean, it looked like children had painted the garage door. And I remember asking Mrs. Whitaker about it, and she said, you said, well, what are we going to do? We can't ruin the children's art. Like, we can't take this down, right? And so anyways, so you could say that Ellery was sort of early childhood, like raised in this environment of like, you create your own art, right? This morning she woke up and she took a piece of paper and she folded it and she turned it into a computer. So she took markers and she drew little square keys, right? And she was opening it up and pretending it was a computer. And I thought, of course, this is the struggle, because it's kind of like, well, if we're all going to paint this owl for art class, and she's like, I don't want to paint the owl, so I had to share that story because it was so perfect. And I was like, of course, this is where she's struggling. Yeah.
It's art is a hard one for me because it's it's such an individualized process and experience, and none of the great artists that we hang up in our house or know the names of were ever following someone else's prompt, right? That was coming from their brains. And isn't that what art is?
Right. I thought it was when I was thinking about it, I was like, it's so like, I don't know, apropos, right? Like it's just, art is supposed to be interpretive, and it's supposed to be unique, and it's supposed to be different. And so, and I'm sure that they probably get the chance to do those sorts of things at times, but it was just sort of funny that she was like, well, we always have to do the project, and I don't like to do the project. I thought, well, I don't blame you, I don't blame you. So I want to talk more about, we touched on it, but I want to dive deeper into risk. And I know there's some significant science behind this and stuff too. So I want to talk about this, because even though we've alluded to it, I want to specifically, maybe we could start with just talking about like, what are some ways at the preschool that you guys encourage risk? I've seen things like a ladder tilted up against a tree and different things like that. But if you guys could elaborate on maybe things that you guys do intentionally to create more risk for kids.
Sure. Yeah, definitely ladders. This year we created a little small world area with a used pallet board that really turned into another place to climb. So it's really not small world anymore. It's another climbing space, right? Children absolutely love to climb. And so we've also got another area of this grapevine that's naturally growing in between trees. And for the last 3 years, children have carted over whatever they needed to climb up to, get themselves up into that and use it as a swing. I mean, there's not a whole lot of things that we say no to. It's more of a, what's your plan? What do you want to do here? As they're moving up and having that proximity to still be able to be there for them if they need it, or if we can see that they're starting to feel scared or anxious or just needing a little assistance, but still like asking me like, what do you need help with? How can I help you? And helping guide them through some of those things if it's necessary. But yeah, tons of climbing for sure. Gosh, I mean, the woods is a unending source of risk. We are in water and climbing from some pretty steep hills and noticing some places that have eroded over the last couple of years that are even steeper. And they're still climbing them. They're still finding roots and things to hold on to. And so, yeah, just there's lots of opportunity. The one thing that just came to my mind, and Brandy, you'll remember this, was a student that he was walking across. So our creek runs through our woods. We had some pretty steep banks on either side in this one particular area, and 2 trees had fallen across each other, kind of making an X. This is Javi. I don't know if you remember this or not, Brandy, but he started to walk across it, which was for him is more of a run. For most people, it's a run. His walk is more like a run. And I remember catching my breath and starting to reach out to say, like, wait, like, wait a minute, let me help you. And Brandy's like, he's got it. And I just stepped back. But I mean, we have endless opportunities for risk all over all over our school, honestly, because again, we adhere to that principle of safe as necessary, not safe as possible. And so, in order to give children an opportunity to do their own risk assessment, to decide, I want to try this, I'm ready for this now, or I'm not quite ready yet, or I'm not sure how to do this yet, right? There have to be those opportunities. So, and again, some of that just goes back to permission too, what I kind of touched on earlier. So
Yeah, and per usual, I agree with every single thing you say. When I think about risk, I can't separate it from trust. And I love, Janna, that you brought up. They also know, children know what they can and can't do. And adults, on one side, will ensure that there's not too much risk, but sometimes the opposite is true and they'll encourage too much. So when we have there's like drama about bumbo seats, like asking children to sit up before their bodies are ready, which I totally used those with my children. So no judgment zone, but we'll try to encourage a child to go down a slide that feels too big, or we'll keep pushing for them to make this jump off of this stair. And that's just as harmful really as limiting them when they do feel confident, because what we should be nurturing is a sense of trust for their own body and their own knowing about their body's capabilities. We've definitely had some super risky play at the preschool, but it's generally from the same type of children who have really strong connection to their muscle systems and they're very aware of what they can and can't do. You're not going to see someone that's not very comfortable climbing, jumping off the top of the structure, because they know when they're ready and they know when they're not. And we would never encourage a child to do that when they don't feel ready in their body. And all that goes back to cultivating this sense of trust that they do know what they are capable of. And sometimes there needs to be a little nudge, like, I believe in you too. And then that's enough for them to take the final plunge, whether they're jumping up or down, or maybe playing with something really messy. Some kids have such an aversion to that feeling on their hands. That's another form of risk that we see at the preschool often. And over time, as we give them space and freedom to explore these materials, and most importantly, to watch their peers, eventually they get more and more brave, and that courage will eventually, encourage them to take the risk. And sometimes that's covering their hands in paint for the first time ever. But we don't push that until they feel ready. And sometimes that takes a long time, lots of observation, lots of thinking, lots of weighing of that risk for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of the fact that when Ellery first started, she was really young. And one of the things that I remember telling you was we just wanted her to become more confident in herself, like not just in her mental health wise, but also in her physicality and understanding her body. I know you talk a lot about like spatial awareness, like kids do have spatial awareness. They're very aware of how high they are on the ladder or whatever, a lot of times. But I remember like the very first year there, pictures would come back from preschool and she was always the sort of silent observer, right? Like there would be a kid hanging from a vine or climbing a ladder or something. And there's Ellery in the background, like watching that person do it. And one of my favorite pictures ever, that I used to have it saved as my background on my phone, is from her last year at preschool toward the end of the year when she was in full on mud gear, like full on mud suit. And she's hanging, I don't remember if it was like a slack line or if it's a vine. I'm not sure. It was like, or maybe it was a rope you guys had tied between two trees or something. And she was full upside down. Like I'm talking like 100% upside down. And just biggest smile, like upside down. And a lot of that is right, like the timing of a child's development and like when she's ready to do that, but also just, when given the space, what awesome things can happen. And so I'm just going to warn you guys now that my youngest, because of Ellery, is already at that level. So just be ready because she's ready to hang upside down, but and that probably plays a role too, right? Like what kids are used to before they come in. So I just had to share that story because we saw such huge change in her, not just with the risk piece, but just in her confidence and understanding her body and trusting herself. which is also huge.
Yeah. And overcoming that risk leads to all of that confidence. It's like, I know myself, I know what I can do. I know when I need to stop. I have this boundary. And what more could we want for all people? And Jenny, as an entrepreneur, like you have to be able to mitigate risk and then sometimes take the plunge, and you have to really trust yourself and believe in yourself. And those things, they begin as play when we're young, but that is all intentional. Our brains are preparing us for those decisions that we're going to make later on. A different kind of risk, but the same skills are required.
Yeah, one thing that I keep thinking about is, and I want to make sure we do touch on this as well, because I think it's important too for the women that are listening, because I know for me, especially when I think back to like my 20s and working in a corporate job, this was before I had children. I don't think I ever got outside. Like, it sounds so crazy to say, but I mean, we live in a chronically indoor society. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, I was sitting under fluorescent lights every single day in a cubicle with, temporary walls. And I was there every day from 8 to 5. And, yes, I would go for a 20-minute walk with the dog, or I would, the weekends we would do what we could to get outside. But like, it wasn't a focus for me. It wasn't a focus for me, even as just a single, but this was before children or anything. And one thing that we've really had to do is, my oldest daughter, after starting the preschool, she only wanted to be outside. It's like she became so used to, like, you guys always say, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So it would be 22 degrees and she'd be like, let's go outside. Like, come on, Dad, like, get your boots on. And it was just like, my inclination was to be like, oh my gosh, it's 20 degrees. Like, I don't want to go outside. But then you're like, wait, she knows no different. It's not cold to her. Like, this is what she, even if it's only 10 minutes, this is what she wants to do. And so we have become, I mean, you ask any of our neighbors, we live in a subdivision. So we've contemplated lately if that's the right choice for us, because we are so stuck sometimes. But we have neighbors who will tell you we are outside all the time. And my youngest is the same way. It's like, as soon as breakfast is over, she wants her shoes on, out the door. It has changed us. Like, I'm not just talking about my children, but like us as adults, it's given us so much more clarity. It helps us relax so much more. I feel like I sleep better, right? Like, I don't want to dive too much into like the science of all of it, but this concept of vitamin N is something that I've talked about on the podcast, and for encouraging people to get more outdoors. But I'd love to sort of hear your guys' perspective on this. The other thing I want to throw into this is, I remember when we met a friend for a play date, when Ellery was probably 3 or 4, and we met at this like nature playground. And the other child that we were meeting looked around at this nature playground like, what am I supposed to do with this? And there were sticks, some nuts on the ground. There was like a hollow tree. There was a log on the ground. And I remember watching my oldest just take off running, like, oh my gosh, this whole place is ours for the next however long. And she just went right to imagination. And so that's kind of where I want to go with this is nature, but also imagination. She would, she called it witch's brew. She would stir this like, little puddle of leaves, she was like so imaginative in those moments. And I look at this other child, nothing obviously wrong with the child whatsoever. That's not what I'm trying to say, but she was very used to sort of like the daycare setting and traditional toys. And she didn't know what to do in that space. So I want to address this problem, this sort of chronic problem that we have of not getting outdoors as adults, but also the good that it can do for our children as well.
I think for me, I guess this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, just like this hurried life, right? That we all live, so many things to do, so many places to be. And that's really why our learning environments have to change, because our lives are so different. I'm 35 and I spent my days as a child running around until dark with neighbors in the woods all over the place. There was all this unstructured time for us to decide what to do, right? You get good at making decisions by making decisions. But we've kind of taken those decisions away from our children. And so when they have this very structured life, we have to provide these learning environments where they have time to make choices and mistakes and risks and think about things. And that always leads me to dawdling, which I love that word, the art of dawdling. And I think grandparents have it figured out by the time they get to that spot. If it takes you 20 minutes to put on your shoes with grandma, it's fine, because that's what we're doing right now. We're putting on our shoes. But in our house, it's like, we've got 10 minutes, we've got to be here. It's time for soccer. And so we don't ever get to dawdle. I think for me, I dawdle best in nature. And when you're talking about that, like imagination, I think as you get older, I make that connection to wonder. And the sense of wonder is so powerful and amazing. And spending more and more time in nature gives me that permission to dawdle, to slow down. There's nothing to do out there. It's kind of like the shower, right? Like I always do so much great thinking in the shower because there's no screen, there's nothing. I can't do anything but just stand and be right there in the water. And that's how I feel when I'm in the woods. And so I am naturally drawn to a slower pace because I'm noticing so many things, and so many things are making me wonder. And that has turned me into someone who sees so much magic in the tiniest things. And I think that is probably the best part of life, being able to, kind of separate from what's happening, almost like out of body, and be so appreciative and aware of the things that are happening around you, whether it's what a child says, or the way that a leaf falls, or the shadows. Janna spent a lot of time investigating shadows this week with the students. There's so much wonder there, and children are still really connected to that wonder. So they help us, and nature helps us to connect with that wonder inside all of us, which really makes life the most magical.
Yeah, I was thinking, of course, I agree with everything that Brandy said again. But I was thinking about how being outside in nature, nature is has a very calming effect on people, right? It's very grounding. But also my senses are heightened when I'm outside, whether just in the backyard or in the woods. You don't have to be in the woods, right? You can just be in the grass in your front yard, you know? Um, but my senses are heightened. So I'm noticing everything, and things become so very vivid, and like Brandy referenced, like I'm noticing very small, tiny things. But that also carries over into all the other spaces where I find myself. So if I have spent some time outside, and let's say I'm cooking dinner and it's around 5:30ish in the evening now, at least as our days are growing shorter, um, I'm noticing the way the sun is spilling in through the kitchen window while I'm cooking dinner, right? I'm maybe not as frustrated with the dried leaves that are being tracked in by my dog. I'm stopping and picking it up, but also noticing, oh, what kind of leaf was that? What tree did that come from? It's just it really does change your perspective about a lot of things too, I feel like. But something that definitely, I know that there are people that are studying, there have been studies that have already been done about this, but just the creativity that children are losing, because we are staying inside of a walled room with fluorescent lights with a prescribed curriculum. We're telling them everything they need to do step by step, and that's being lost. And so when Brandy says dawdling, like, that's not a dirty word. That's that's really, really important to have some time for that in your life. And yeah, we were just as an education team at Conner Prairie, we were just sharing a little bit of that last night through just the conversations that we have together about that. And I don't know, it helped. I think it just helps us stay curious too.
Yeah. I was
I
just getting
think
ready to say, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, bringing this all home to your work in hormone health. I mean, nature is, it's a cycle. And when I think about that, that makes me feel really connected to the universe, this kind of like mirror of, like, now I'm noticing, I used to say like, oh, I love summer, like, oh, I'm dreading winter. But I've just been so excited to think about how things are about to take a nice, long, quiet break a stillness, a rest. And I noticed those same things being required of me every single month, because I have these moments of great energy and spring and things are blooming and my brain is engaging. And then in summer where it's like, just you're on a 10, and maybe that's your energy level when you get all these things done. And then as fall hits, like in our bodies, that looks like I need to go in, I need to wrap up, I need something warm, I need to comfort myself, and then I need rest. And so as a woman, like I feel very connected to the cycles of the seasons, and nature helps me to feel like I'm much more a part of all of that, and that we don't really exist without each other.
Yeah, so true. And I mean, one thing that I always say on the podcast is women are lunar beings. So women, obviously we follow the moon, we follow the patterns of the moon, which it's so funny when women learn that the first time, they're like, well, of course, like that makes total sense. The same thing is true for nature, right? Like there's a reason you most likely don't sleep as well with a full moon, right? I mean, it's meant to be that way. And so I like talking about the seasons and sort of how we are as humans makes total sense, right? Like we sort of introvert more in the winter, right? We're more, like you said, resting and settling and preparing and nurturing. And the spring is sort of an awakening, right? And so it totally makes sense. And for me, kind of making this full circle this morning, taking Sutton on the walk in the woods, combining the two things. So me being in nature, but also me letting my child teach me in nature. The combination of those two things was so cool, because here we were for, I don't know, 30 minutes, like walking through the woods, and all we could talk about was crunch, 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 right? Like she would step and march on the leaves, and you really have to slow down when you have a 2-year-old, you have to take that hike at about -5 miles per hour. So it was literally like crunching the leaves and picking up the ones that were, and saying what colors they were, right? Red, green, yellow. Picking up a stick, or she took like a walnut and threw it. She wanted to see how far she could throw it. Like we did that for 30 minutes. And ironically, we get in the car to come home, and I had this like urgent message that I had left my phone in the car. And I had this urgent message from someone, and it was so less urgent after that, right? It was just like, what? Like, what is this about? Like, this is just your made up urgency. It's not my emergency, right? Like it just resets your mind in the way that you need. So that helps us bring it full circle. But I want to ask one sort of wrap up question, final question, because I just think so much of you guys. And I think that what you're doing, even in just this little corner of Indiana, is so powerful. And I'm hoping that, I've had a lot of people ask me, they see like my social media and they'll ask me about the school that Ellery went to, or, like, wow, I didn't know those things existed. Like we'll go on vacations and Ellery will tell them like, she used to say, I go to outdoor preschool, and people would be like, what is that? And then they'd be like, that's so cool. And I know that there are lots of places like this around the country, but it's certainly not the norm. Right. And I think about like our education system, and I think about like how far we have to go, as far as, making improvements with letting, you said earlier, letting the child be the curriculum. But I'm curious, if you guys ran the world of education, what would you say would be the number one change that has to happen?
It's hard to choose one. I mean, I'd say I can probably speak for both of us, like just to do it outside. Just take them outside.
Yeah.
The best environment to encourage a sense of wonder, to allow children to assess risk, to provide materials to create with. You have everything you need out there. I think that would be it. Letting the child lead and or being outside, it's a tie.
Mm-hmm.
It is a tie. Absolutely. That was exactly what came to my mind. Yeah, they've got to have more time outside. If they can't be out there all the time, then it's got to be way more than a 15-minute recess once
Mm-hmm.
a day.
Yeah, and I think
we're near enough.
If we say, the child leading, they would probably take you out there anyway. So I guess letting the child lead has to be number one. You could do some pretty terrible predetermined curriculum outside too, I suppose. So probably number one would have to be letting the children lead you.
Preferably probably outside. Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
probably would choose that because,
Yeah.
like I said, they know
Yeah.
what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you guys today. I hope that people have gained some insights from this, and if nothing else, that they can take this into their own lives. At the end of the day, yes, our kids are in school and they do those, you know, it's pretty much going to happen no matter what. But at the same time, you are their parent and they have plenty of time with you. I remember Miss Janna saying that to me when I was so worried about making a choice for Ellery's school and, you know, what are we going to do? And I remember her saying, well, she's with you guys, like you guys are the most powerful mentors in her life. Right. And so there are things out there like 1,000 hours outside, little challenges that you can do with your family. There are books on these topics, things like vitamin N that I've referred to before. I'll ask you two if you guys have any great resources about nature that parents can read or look into. If you guys want to send them to me, I'm happy to put them in the show notes for everybody so that you guys can, you know, expand upon this. My listeners can learn more. But at the end of the day, I think this does apply so much to what we need, right? We're coming off of, I don't want to say the pandemic has ended because we all know it hasn't really ended, but we're coming off of these few years of, you know, it's interesting to me that we think about like those 2 years of the COVID pandemic were so interesting because we did all these things to quote unquote protect ourselves indoors. And I remember telling myself like throughout that whole process, like, why don't we just take the kids outside? Like the risk for that particular virus goes down drastically when we're outside. And so the fact that I've been so grateful that Ellery had the chance to continue, nothing ever really changed for her. She was able to still go, still socialize, still be outdoors, right? And so where a lot of kids, I think, were, you know, whether it was masking or being indoors and they had those years, it affects their life, right? In early childhood, it's affecting their life. I look at Sutton, we call her a pandemic baby because she was born in 2020. The other day we were at a play class and she took the name tag sticker and she put it on her mouth. And I'm pretty sure she was trying to imitate like mask wearing because she had seen it. She's seen it off and on. And so anyways, all that to say, I don't want to go down that tangent, but I just think, you know, this is the solution to so many things, right? Like getting ourselves out more, getting our children out more, and letting them take the lead can maybe help us all unlearn and change the world. So thank you so much, Brandy and Janna, for being with me today. I'm so grateful for your time. You guys, I'll link everything up in the show notes for you so you can swipe up to look at extra resources. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jenny.